Hey folks, and welcome to episode 17 of the PureJoy Podcast. Today is all about games. Well, specifically video and board games. My guest Dakota and I will be breaking down just why these games are so influential in his life, both early and current. We're hitting all the nostalgic feels today, folks. We'll also talk a little bit about the problems we as lifelong gamers think that the industry faces in the current era of video games. So sit back, relax, and allow me to introduce my guest to you, Dakota Heer. Yeah, let's dive on in. Let's have Dakota, why don't we have you introduce yourself, tell us who we're talking to today on the podcast.
Hey, I'm Dakota Heer. Not here.
Yes, I'm just so used to it.
Everybody does it. My name's Dakota. I daylight in financial services, and I moonlight in D&D, streaming, Twitch, all kinds of crazy things. Again, I know M from way back in college, where we did a bunch of shows together. Mm-hmm. Super excited to be here today. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, happy New Year. We're recording this on the 1st of the year, so that's fantastic. It's just like a early start to the year. Some people are, not so into the new year, new you vibe, and I don't necessarily know that I'm that deep into it, but I think the beginning of the year is like inspirational. And I always feel more empowered. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I think it's just like the general energy of the time. So
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we like to start each of these podcasts off with a little question, and that is something that you found joy in today.
Ooh. You know what? the greatest happy surprise for me today, I woke up no hangover whatsoever. Ooh. No, I had a lot of drinks last night, probably more than I should have. But I woke up, didn't have a headache, didn't need anything really. It was an amazing surprise for me. That's
fantastic. How was your so your New Year's was a good fun time then? Your New Year's celebration.
It was awesome.
I don't think you would ask me about mine, but I was so busy setting up I didn't even get to ask you about yours.
Yeah, we went out to a couple friends of ours. They live up in West Hollywood, and we went over there. We played some Jackbox. They had like a whole charcuterie set up. We made like these fancy cheeses. Had some champagne at midnight, and some like whiskey gingers the rest of the night. Yeah, it was incredible.
That sounds fun. Night. That sounds fun. Yeah. We talked about before. I just sort of worked, and then I was sore from work, and I did some content work when I got off of work, but went to bed long before midnight. Let's see, my joy of the day. I woke up. You were expecting to be hungover when you woke up. I was expecting to be just the sorest. When I was going to bed last night, I was honestly regretting having set up this interview for this morning, because I was like, I just worked way harder than I expected to. I was like, oh no. I just scrubbed as hard as I could for 6 hours straight, with maybe 10 minutes of a break to go to the bathroom. But like, it's something that I wanted to get done. I wasn't pressured into it. So I felt good about having done it, but I was like, oh no, there's no way my brain's going to be on. I woke up and I felt incredible. I went. Yeah. For the first time, I listened to my own release of the podcast. I do all the editing for it, right? I do all of this work on it, so I know the episode. I've listened to it all the way through several times before I hit output. Once I hit output and I post it, I haven't listened to them again because I've done it. But I woke up, I had a lot of time, so I made coffee and I listened to it, and I was like, okay, it feels different listening to it as the episode. Like listening to the episode, I picked up much more about maybe things I could improve or do differently next time than I do when I listen to it in the software. And it was just like a different mental state about it, and that felt really good. So I've just been really inspired this morning.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I
wonder, do you feel the same? So when I'm making something, I often, when I'm like in the zone, in the mode of creating, I have a really hard time separating like the product from where I am in the process. But after everything's done, I'm like, I can look back on it and be like, okay, now I can finally appreciate this from a distance. I don't have to be like, I don't feel the pressure to make it right at the moment. It's just like I can sit back and actually enjoy it afterward.
Yeah, I think that is that feeling I had. I sat back and I enjoyed it. Yes, there were things I was like, yes, I could fix, but it was just nice to sit there and like, like even if I want to fix that right now, I can't. I can't like click onto my thing and move things around. Like it is what it is. Next time I can do better. But I like, you know, I got the chance to feel pride in the thing that I did rather than I got to get this done feeling about it. Yeah. Okay, cool.
That's awesome.
So our daily joy out of the way, onto the topic at hand for the episode. What in life brings you pure joy, Dakota?
So, I mean, there's a bunch of things, of course.
Sure.
I wanted to talk specifically today about a couple of things. So we could, you know, go with this any direction that you want. But I was thinking about talking about games today. Board games, video games, strategy games. I'm a huge fan of all of it. Have been since I was a kid. Yeah, really, like there's nothing quite like the feeling, especially on like, because Christmas is recently, I guess it's on the brain, of like getting a new game, opening up like the plastic wrap, putting it in, and then diving into things.
Yeah, absolutely. So games in general. Let's talk about. Let's start by talking about what that's like for you. You said you started with quote unquote games at a young age. What was that like for you at a young age?
It was. I mean, it's weird now that I like think about it about how it was back then, with the perspective of who I am now and the people I've met since then.
Sure.
But at the time, it was very normal. So for context, I grew up. My my aunt and uncle were beta testers for THQ.
Wow.
So they got to test out all of the new games that like were in development at the time. And sometimes we got sent home with like early access copies of games. So we got to play a bunch of games before they were even released. And then my uncle, he ran a software development blog, sort of something like that, where he would talk about like games in particular that were coming out. And so game developers would also send him copies of a bunch of their games that they wanted him to review.
Games.
Exactly. So at the time, it was just normal. Like a bunch of people in my family were involved with video games. We had a bunch of game systems from a bunch of different relatives. It was just normal at the time for me to like be very focused on that. But now looking back on it, I'm like, oh man, that was a really dominating influence on my early life.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of this kind of stemmed from a love of video games.
For sure.
I imagine is what a lot of that kind of focused on. Did any of that have any, like, were there board games coming in and out of that? I know that like THQ is a video game company, but that doesn't mean that the blog didn't pull in things.
Yeah. So we didn't get many early access copies of board games, but we did. I mean, my family was big into like the sort of classic board games as well, like Sorry, Game of Life, Monopoly, chess, checkers. I liked all of it. But one of the first clubs I joined in middle school was a Risk club.
Oh, wow.
Where we would get together during lunchtime and we would like just play Risk. And I personally love Risk, but a lot of people hate it.
It's such a time-consuming game.
It is.
It's huge.
There's usually only one winner, but oh man, there's a version of Risk out now called Risk Legacy, where it focuses less on like the one winner take all sort of thing, and like a persistent world. So like the game that you play one time has an impact on the next game that you'll play.
I love the legacy releases of games recently, or maybe like past 10 years or so.
Yeah, exactly. So that has been revolutionary for getting people to actually play that game with me because it's so good. It's so interesting. But when you spend 2 hours and then somebody else takes out all of your last province, I understand where the hesitation comes in ever wanting to play that game again.
I have only played a full game of Risk, like traditional Risk, one time in my life.
Really?
Not that I didn't enjoy it. It's just we had a Lord of the Rings Risk, and it had a second way to play, which was like something about trekking through the game to get the ring to Mount Mordor rather than taking all the things. And so we often played
they had,
that.
like, random events that, like, sometimes the ring would progress, the fellowship would progress along.
Exactly. So we played that a little bit more often, as the board game, because it was more approachable as like a board game night. Because the time in which we played it as Risk, it took us like 4 days or something like that to really get down and play. Long form strategy games I do enjoy, but I don't know, my attention span has really gotten so short, so they become a little bit more difficult for me to play, I think, as of late.
I totally get that. I've had to really start actively exercising my brain more. You think about, like, lots of people do a bunch of physical exercise, but when you're doing something kind of like menial all day, and especially like my job has a lot of like data entry and administrative work that I have to do. And like, I love what I do, but that part of my job is not very mentally stimulating. So I've had to, like, on my off hours, figure out ways that I can like keep my brain engaged and growing. The same way that you go to the gym and like work on your muscles, you have to work on your brain as well to keep it going.
100%. I feel lucky that I started working at a grocery store when I was already like mentally full, like I do all of my content stuff, my editing, live streaming when I'm not editing, like I'm like doing that all of the time. And I needed, what I actually started to feel was kind of the opposite, right? I needed to like get up and do something kind of menial, something that I wasn't super focused on, to allow myself to take a break.
The opposite is also true.
Exactly. And it's interesting. I've gotten so many more ideas since I've started doing it, and it's just like tiny little things. I'll be like, ooh, this is a good idea for this sidebar, till I'm at work. I can't do anything with that right now. But then sidebarring it, I like develop a little bit more. So
that happens even in physical exercise too. Like they did some sort of study, which is the most wishy-washy way to start off an argument. They did a study, but I remember reading this, that people who exercise every single day are less effective at their exercises are less effective than those who take 2 to 3 rest days in their week. Because your body needs a chance to like grow and do the things that you're preparing it for while you're exercising.
And then I guess by that extent, your brain would need the same on the flip side of that coin, some rest days in order to really just process all of the information it's been receiving. That's a good point. I think that's a great way to think about it and focus upon just like making progress. We talked a little bit about early stages. How do these, how do video games, board games fit into your life now?
I mean, besides being my sort of like primary relaxation method, I also stream occasionally. So I stream D&D on Sunday mornings now. But so I've been playing lots of like story focused RPGs lately. I've also been really diving into like games that are very nostalgic for me. So like remasters of like old PS2 games or old like Nintendo 64 games, something like that. Like games that I played a lot as a kid that now I'm like, oh man, this was so good. I can't believe I didn't appreciate this as much as I should have then. So I typically will come home from work, and before even thinking about putting on like a show or a movie or something, I'll usually put up some like Lego game or something like that, and just kind of like let my mind de-stress. Because there's some games where you're like, oh, I really want to be invested in this. I want to spend a lot of time on like focusing on it. Like the new God of War game that just came out is a lot like that for me. I'm like, I don't want that to be a relaxation game for me. I want that to be a game that I'm like focused
upon playing.
Yeah. But some games like Lego Star Wars, I'm like, you know what? I don't need to be as dialed in for this.
Right.
I can kind of like put on a Spotify playlist and just like totally zone out and let my mind de-stress.
Definitely. I think I need to take more of those moments. I find that moment, there's a few games that I've been doing that, and I do it at like right before I go to bed. There's, as you've said, all sorts of studies about how like looking at screens and stuff before you go to bed is not like the best way to do it. But I don't know. It like maybe it affects the way I sleep, but I sleep hard. And once I'm asleep, I'm asleep. So it doesn't seem to affect me as much. And I turn brightness levels down. I try to make myself tired. But that game for me has recently been, there's like bullet hell games where you have to like dodge everything and kill everything. And I'll only do a few levels. I'm not like stressing out about getting through this as fast as possible. And when I start to feel stressed, I'm like, it's time to really like put away the screens. But I think after work would be a great time to do that, because I just sort of dive right into homework now, so yeah, I think finding moments to use that to relax throughout your day is very good. And it's a way that you've been able to use this thing that's been a part of your life for a really long time to both like help and progress you in your current life.
And it's also such a great way to keep in touch with friends too. Like enough cannot really be said about that. Like during the pandemic, right at the start of it, when we were all home with nothing to do for like 9 months, we played a ton of Among Us, as I'm sure everybody did. But it was a way for everybody from East Coast, from Central Time, from Pacific Coast, Mountain Coast, I guess, can be in it. But Mountain Coast? Did I say Mountain Coast?
Mountain Time.
Mountain Time.
There's coasts of lakes. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Lake coasts. Pond coasts.
The Colorado coast.
Yeah, right.
It's such a great way to keep us all together and talking and keep us all sane together. Recently, I've been foraying into Valorant, which is a whole other ball game. I am so bad at it, like almost fundamentally, because I just never played. Well, I never played that many FPSs growing up. I played like Halo and I think the first Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and that was pretty much it. But so now I'm like, my friend is telling me, you have to aim at where the head is supposed to be, not at the ground where their feet are gonna be. I'm like, oh, all right, that makes a lot more sense now that I think about it like that.
Do you use, so like the two diverse paths in first person shooters nowadays are controller and keyboard and mouse. What is your flow there?
So I have been playing keyboard and mouse, not for any reason or intentional, just because that's what I have available.
Right.
We have a PS4, but we don't play Valorant on it or any other sort of FPS on it.
Sure.
Wish it was more exciting than that.
No, I mean, no. That's it is. I feel so the difference there is that like I feel controller much easier to approach. In the days of FPS being a controller industry, Halo, Modern Warfare 1, like the originals, like I felt that I was really strong at them. Less so Call of Duty and more so Halo. And I was like really excited when Halo Infinite released, and then all the lobbies were like mixes of keyboard, mouse, and controller, and the skill ceiling for keyboard and mouse is way higher. You can be so much faster using your entire arm. Yeah. I mean, it's the speed at which you can move with, more muscle rather than just your thumb.
You can like up the controller sensitivity, but it only like goes so fast at a certain point, and if it goes any faster, then you miss people. But a mouse, you can like you just have so much more pinpoint accuracy, which again can be really, really great for people who know how to do it.
Sure.
You know what? I feel like the good comparison controller has like a more average skill range, and then keyboard and mouse has a much larger skill range. So I'm like somewhere down here at the moment. Yeah. But eventually maybe I'll be like up here.
It's muscle memory. It's muscle memory.
Exactly.
My friend tried to get me into Escape from Tarkov, which is only keyboard and mouse. And the thing, my already biggest problem with keyboard and mouse is that on a controller, I know all the buttons by heart, even if I switch controllers. But if someone's like, press H, I know where H is, but I always have to like look. I'm like, okay, H. And then, of course, Escape from Tarkov is every button on the keyboard is used. And he's like, all right, press U and then F to dodge only slightly to the side. I'm like, I can't keep up. I don't know what I'm pressing.
I always feel like even on a controller too, sometimes they do this. My hand just plays a whole Twister game on its own occasionally. Like I'll be like, okay, I have to press R2, R1, triangle, L3, like 3 of the different directional buttons. I'm like, what is my hand doing? I'm gonna have arthritis in my old age for sure. I'm gonna have PlayStation and especially the N64 controllers to blame for it.
So video games, what about like board games? Do you play a lot of board games nowadays? Now that we're getting more into like kind of in-person community?
Yeah, a ton. I'm a big fan of a lot of board games, particularly long form board games are like where I feel like my real passion lies, but those can be a bit of a harder sell for people.
Sure.
So right now, probably the game I've played most in 2022, or I did play most in 2022, was probably Codenames. Have you heard that game before?
I've heard of it, and I think my brother even tried to get us to play it, maybe as a party game? Is there
It's kind of a party game.
Okay.
There's 2 teams, a grid of like 25 different words on there, and one player has to be like the code master, so they know which of the 25 words are the right ones for your team to guess. And you have to indicate to your team as many of those words as possible, with only using one word as a clue. So if there was like New York and skyscraper, actually, I don't even know what I would do for that one. If there was like New York skyscraper, maybe you would say something like Manhattan as your connection word. And then your team would guess, okay, well, New York's probably one of them, maybe skyscraper as well. Yeah, but anyway, it's a really easy game to set up, easy for people to understand how it works, very low like buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could already play the game like enough at a like. So it does seem. So is it long form?
It's like multiple rounds.
Okay.
It can be long form, but typically oftentimes what happens is we'll play like 1 or 2 rounds, and then one team will get super competitive, and they'll be like, "Let's go again." And so it can turn from like a 30 minutes to 60 minutes game into like a 2 or 3 hour thing.
Sure.
Because it's just super easy and very simple, but there's like a high skill cap, I guess, going back to what we were saying earlier.
Yeah. So as an example, what are some of your favorite like long form games that if you just had your way, you could play all the time?
So I've been playing, or I just got this game, Betrayal at House on the Hill. And I've had the 2nd edition of that game for forever. My box is totally destroyed. But we just recently got the 3rd edition as well, which changes up some of the rules, adds some new cards in, adds some new like scenarios for it. Yeah, that game was probably my first real like long form board game that wasn't like Monopoly.
Yeah, inspired me to like try out other board games. I was like, because I was a traditional board game person before I played that game, and I was like, holy cow, the board games have changed. Like this is not Monopoly.
Did we play that together? I can't remember.
I think we had to have. I think
I was the betrayal guy.
Yeah, I know I played it several times throughout college, and I imagine that, I mean, I probably played it with Alex Boyd at some point, and I think that you might have even been there for something like that. Like, yeah, absolutely. I think that we probably did. Did you? So when you're talking about legacy games, have you seen the Betrayal Legacy?
I have. I'm so excited for it. I don't have it yet.
Yeah.
It's like what, $100 or something like that?
It's expensive. Yeah.
But it looks so good.
That was someone had told me about it, and I've just been infatuated with the idea of legacy board games. It kind of draws me into almost a tabletop role-playing game. Like it's you know, like it matters. Like the history of this game is now intact, and that's interesting.
Exactly. I mean, it's just such a cool thing. I feel like you really have to get like a regular gaming group going for some of them. Because I mean, it is a lot like a TTRPG campaign where you're like, okay, so we're gonna play this board game, but we're not just gonna play it once. We're gonna play it 10 times, and obviously not back to back. But that there's a large buy-in on that game.
So I've never played a long form board game beyond, you know, Betrayal, or maybe, I don't know, would Settlers of Catan maybe kind of fall into that. So like those, my brothers and I 2 years ago now almost picked up a game called Gloomhaven.
Oh my God.
And we finished. And there's like a handful of missions we failed to unlock in our story mode, and we're not ones to just go back and do them. If we failed, we failed. So we beat the storyline and every side quest we got except one, and then we bought the first expansion pack. So we've been going for like 2 years on this one board game, like once every other week or so. Yeah.
I love that game so much, and I've only played half of one mission on it. But I'm entranced.
Yeah.
So my own story with that game, my brother-in-law Sean, he is a huge board game guy just like me, and he got that game Gloomhaven, which for those of you who don't know is this massive like TTRPG like board game, where you play like a group of like ragtag mercenaries and adventurers and stuff, and you're basically just trying to survive and occasionally work towards your own goals. And he brings out this massive box, and he's like, Dakota,
the biggest board game box I've ever seen. I try to compare it to the other big ones that I see when I'm out. There's no way it's the biggest.
No. And he's like, Dakota, we're gonna play this game. I'm like, fuck yeah, we are. Hell yeah, we are. And we spent probably 3 hours unboxing the whole thing, popping out a bunch of different little like room tiles and tokens and stuff like that. Only for me to finally set up the game for us to actually play probably like a week later.
Yeah, right. It takes a long time to set up.
Yeah. It was going to be me, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and Leah, my girlfriend. And we set up the whole thing. It took maybe an hour for us to set up just the first mission. And another hour and a half for us to get like 2 turns into that game because we're still learning the rules.
Yep.
And then we stopped playing. We're like, it's been 3 hours since we said we were going to start playing this game. Like we just don't have any more time. To make
you feel better about that, 2 years into it, we have to stop almost every turn to think like, how do the rules work for this? Like, that's one of the most intriguing parts of this game for me, is that it is that hard. I wanted to get an example.
Here it is.
Look at this thing.
Here it is.
Look at this.
Insane.
Look at this board game box. It's like 10 pounds, 15 pounds. It's huge. And it's just filled with all of the like cardboard stuff you need. I've just never seen a board game box this big.
It's massive.
Super appreciate it.
It's also on it was a Kickstarter project as well.
Yeah.
They were like, we had this amazing idea for a board game. We're gonna totally crowdfund it. So cool.
And it worked, and they crowdfunded the heck out of it, and they've crowdfunded 2 more like DLCs, almost expansion packs for it since then, and the second one was released in the holiday season this year. So
two things about that to rip off of. The first is that they also have a version out on Steam now, which is a more streamlined version. So for those of you who don't want a huge a briefcase essentially of a game, you can go and purchase it on Steam. I think it's like $20. It's
worth it if you want to check it out and like get the idea of what the board game is about. The rules work only a touch differently, but I have actually, when playing the board game, been able to convince my brothers of like the way that different rules maybe should work based on the way they did work in the video game.
And then, did you hear the story about the organizational set for that game as well?
Well,
about the egg cartons and stuff.
I know that exists. I don't. What do you mean by the story of it?
So, I mean, that game, absolutely massive, like a million different pieces and tokens.
Yeah.
And they don't have any sort of organizational system built into the box whatsoever. It's basically you just throw everything in there and pick everything out.
Ziploc bags is the only way. Well, the cheap way.
Exactly. So somebody came up with the idea that you had to get these, like, I forget what size of these, but you get these like egg cartons, essentially, like just empty egg cartons, no eggs or whatever in them. And then they like built an organizational system based off of these very specific egg cartons. I think it was like 2x4s or something like that. And the manufacturer of those kinds of egg cartons saw such a huge increase in the sales of those egg cartons after that like video was published on how to organize the kit, that they reached out to the person who made the organizational kit in the first place, and they're like, what would it be like if we work together to make an official sponsored version of this, because they're selling all these 2x4 egg cartons,
right?
And like nobody buys like 8 eggs. You will usually buy like the 2 or 3x6 or something like that.
12
so
eggs. Who buys 8 eggs?
This, like, exactly. It sounds so stupid, but they partnered with the guy who made this kit and like totally helped out both of them. It's such a cool story to think about.
Yeah, see, when you ask that, I mean I only know the back end that there is a organizational thing together. Now that I know that it came from 2x4 egg cartons, I will tell my brother, because the actual organizational thing is a little bit more expensive than you would want. Yeah. Having already bought a copy of Gloomhaven, which is $100 and minimum maybe $120 at the normal price. So yeah, it's 2x4 egg cartons is interesting because my brother has the copy. I obviously, they got me a copy for Christmas because I wanted to play it in person with the people here, but my brother Casey in New Mexico has the copy of Gloomhaven, and we use this thing called virtual desktop, some virtual thing that he like positions his phone above and has the board, and he just scans in our cards. So we still flip cards. We still flip cards. We still play the game, but he has to physically move all the pieces, which after 2 years is better now, but it just could be so much more streamlined if we were all in there with our hands.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Took us some time to get used to it, having one person making all that happen, but
that's such a cool idea.
Gloomhaven is
it's a monster,
freaking stellar as far as long form board games go. It's wild.
I mean, it's like the most extreme version of that legacy thing that I was talking about, where it's like you're not buying in one game, you're buying in 10. For Gloomhaven, it's like you're buying in 200.
Yes. You could stop, sure. But like, I like long form, even video games, Skyrim, Oblivion, like something I can pour hundreds of hours into. And Gloomhaven is the first board game to scratch that itch. Like, other games are long, but at the end, you're like, it is done, unless you're playing a legacy. But not with Gloomhaven. It's just next time, I'm done for now, finally.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. That's amazing. I've never met anybody that's actually finished a game of Gloomhaven. So kudos. That's not a small achievement.
No, it took us well over a year to beat the last boss. We also saved the last boss for last. So
nice.
You know, you got to do everything before. That's how I roll in Skyrim too. Cool. So we've talked about some of your favorite like long form story games. What about like video games? What are nowadays some of your favorite video games? I think we kind of mentioned the kind of video games you like to play, but what about like besides Lego and maybe God of War that you're working on now? What are some of the games that take your time?
I mean, my all-time favorite. I'm repping their merch already, and I brought this as well to represent.
The piece. Yes.
This was the prop. Is it all in camera? I can't even see.
It isn't, but it's a keyblade. I mean, it's a keyblade. We can see it. It's moved through at this point. I really like it.
Perfect. Yeah. So Kingdom Hearts is my all-time favorite game series. It's just so. I was watching somebody else like play through it recently for the first time. It was a streamer I watched, LeXP. If you're watching this, shout out. But I was watching her like play through these games that I've been playing since I was a kid for the first time. And she she really put it very clearly. Like, you feel such like nostalgia when you're playing it, even if you haven't ever played it before, because it's like all of these Disney movies and characters that like you know and loved as a kid. And it just like the story is just so pure for the most part. And it just really brings you back to like a simpler time. So that's my favorite game series of all time.
The soundtrack there also like really lends to the nostalgic feeling. It makes you feel like you've been there before. Like you've said, even if you've never been there before. Just the piano trills and the like how light it is, and in the background you feel. Maybe it's like it gives you a sense of like calmness and peace in those cases, and you're like, I felt this before, and I feel connected in this moment to this.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I honestly have a bunch of their like the game's soundtrack just saved onto my Spotify or like my Apple Music, just because like it's just so gorgeous, and it's often using like just a piano or just a violin or something like that. Like they're very, very skilled at making beautiful pieces with minimal instrumentation. Amazing. I'm also a huge fan of anything BioWare touches for the most part. I've been a big fan of Mass Effect since the first one came out.
Okay.
I've been a big fan of Dragon Age for about as long, although I did start Dragon Age after Mass Effect. And then I didn't even realize this was a BioWare game until a couple years ago, but Knights of the Old Republic, with the now non-canon Star Wars prequel, is a BioWare game as well. And I'm a huge fan of basically anything that they touch.
What is it about their style that draws you in?
They are just really good at making you feel like your actions and your character is important in the overall story of things. Like, I love Skyrim, don't get me wrong. But one thing I feel like Skyrim lacks is I don't actually feel like your character makes much of a difference in the world. It doesn't feel like many things would be different if your character just wasn't there at all.
That's true.
Like a lot of the quests end up a lot of like the faction quests end up leading to the same place that you started at. And it's because they're trying to enforce like a status quo, and it's such a huge world and stuff like that. But BioWare takes the opposite approach, where they're like, your character is going to radically change the way that the world works. And it's your choices as the player that are going to determine what kind of world that inherits. I think that they do some really interesting stuff with like morality choices, like Paragon and Renegade, versus like Light Side and Dark Side and Knights of the Old Republic. I think their RPG designers are really inspired for most of the games that they've made.
Yeah, I am not a huge fan when games give you a choice to make, and it doesn't impact anything at all. That was... I made my decision, or I made a comment a little too early when playing, like through new Pokemon Scarlet Violet, when you're given the first opportunity to say yes or no, and the dialogue can continue and will continue slightly differently if you say yes or no. And so when I said no for the first time and it didn't make me go back and say yes, I thought to myself, like, well, this is awesome. Finally, my choices matter. She like responded to me saying no. That's cool. And then after that, it just didn't, like, it doesn't actually matter for anything. It doesn't change any relationship. It doesn't do anything. So my second playthrough of the game, I was like, I even ranted a little bit. Like, what is the purpose of spending time to even just program a branching path in this conversation if it isn't going to lead to anything?
To do anything important.
So when they impact things, like, I think you're totally right. You're totally right. Like a Dragon Age Inquisition or the Dragon Age series is a huge one for that. Mass Effect, where it like actually changes not just your relationship, but like it has wider implications to what could happen in this community or culture in the long form. Yeah,
exactly. And they're really, really good at that. Yeah. Bethesda's is close to that for me. Bethesda makes Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and they get really, really close to that for me. But they often, like, I don't know, the story aspect of it is what I feel like I'm missing in Bethesda games. Oblivion had it. Oblivion was hands down one of the greatest games I've ever played.
I agree.
Skyrim totally skipped the boat on that, although I love the Dawnguard quest line. The Dawnguard quest line is probably the best part of that game for me.
DLC.
Yeah, exactly.
Shocker. They got it right after the fact.
You know what? Fair enough. You got me there. So those are the games I tend to go back to a lot. I'm playing the Spyro Reignited trilogy.
I've watched now. My partner bought that as like one of her first purchases on like Switch.
Yeah. I played the first Spyro game as a kid, never finished it. But it's right up there with like Sly Cooper, Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. It's like some of the old like PlayStation original games that like everybody talks super highly about. So I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll see how it goes. I'm really loving it so far, to be honest.
Yeah.
The other games I just mentioned are games I tend to find myself gravitating back towards a bunch. Sly Cooper, Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. I every year or 2 years I find my way back to those games.
The PlayStation 2 hit it so
really
hard
did.
On the head, and it's shocking that like there are other incredible games that come out, but and I might feel nostalgic in 10 years about them, but I feel like there are significantly more, specifically like PS2, Xbox generation releases that were just absolute bangers and are always like nostalgic for me.
Absolutely. And I feel like it has to do with like when the PS2 was out, we were really in kind of like the Wild West of game design. It was before things had like really been figured out. People were still experimenting with a lot of different styles. They were still figuring like out what was going to work best for an audience level. And I've played some really terrible PlayStation 2 games as well. But the sacrifice of that is that you have to be able to experiment and have some really terrible games in order to have some like really amazing, groundbreaking games. And that's just not something that a lot of publishers are willing to do these days, because it takes so much money to make a game in this day and age. You have to like with all of the different costs, the marketing, everything. It's just so expensive to make a game that they can't afford to take the risks necessary to make new amazing games like the ones that everybody remembers now.
But they can pitch it.
It's really sad.
They can say that it's coming. They can say that this is going to be the thing that they do, Cyberpunk, but then they just like don't do it. Like, I don't know. I, as a gamer, would prefer to wait for groundbreaking nature. I know that their company can't necessarily wait, but I think it could, knowing that you would have made probably double the amount of money on it if the entire internet didn't hate your game. As as a point, I find that people who actually played Cyberpunk enjoy Cyberpunk as much as you enjoy like a Skyrim. But there's so many people that couldn't play it, and that really affected what you wanted.
And the fact that it was in development for what, like 10 years, something insane like that. They switched engines like 2 times. Yeah, I mean, it's just they just overhyped it. That's the thing. I mean, it's like with any sort of sales job, you wanna underpromise and overdeliver, and they overpromised and way underdelivered.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah, I mean it. Yeah, it does. It does. Underdelivered what I was promised. Again, I really enjoyed playing through the game. I found it to be a good world, well built. It was a little stuttery, and my computer couldn't handle the full nature of it, but I still enjoyed it. Like, it was a beautiful place to play in. But I don't know. Could have been so much more.
I feel like we're still waiting on our amazing dystopian sci-fi game. I feel like that's still is a work in progress somewhere. Someone out there has an amazing idea for a cyberpunk game that's like true. Has the dystopian elements of like Shadowrun, a great RPG that I would love to play more of. Someone out there has an amazing idea for a cyberpunk Shadowrun-like game that just needs to be developed.
100%.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Because we haven't hit that setting enough yet.
It feels like we're kind of bridging into another topic I like to approach. I just don't quite know how this fits, and that is, what are some challenges you face in your life when it comes to this joy? Or challenges maybe, since that feels like, I don't know, how do you challenge when you go to play video games? What are some challenges maybe the industry faces, or that you think that, we face as a community with these things?
Sure. I mean, I think that the ongoing like monetization of every aspect of the internet affects the gaming industry just as much as it does any other industry. Like the microtransactions are so insidious.
Yeah.
I read something interesting. Again, there we go again. 3rd time's the charm.
Another study.
I read something interesting, which was talking about how how on like in the App Store you'll go and you'll like find a new game or something, and they'll often like hit you with a welcome package. They'll say like you can get 20 million gold coins and like a 1,000 crystals or like 15 different kinds of currency that you have no idea what it means yet for like $1. And you're like, okay, well, that seems
here's
insane.
$1.
Exactly. The reason that they do that is because they have to ask for your permission the first time an app takes drafts money from your account. But they don't have to re-ask for your permission the 2nd, 3rd, so on time. So they give you an amazing deal so that you can't have buyer's regret later on when they're asking you to spend $15. If they get your permission for the $1 purchase, that gives them permission anytime you click the button that says buy in the future. But the first time they make you confirm that you want to purchase.
Interesting. I like the secondary support on the Apple, because I've accidentally clicked, buy, I bought welcome packages in games, love them.
Exactly.
And then I've accidentally clicked like, buy gems or whatever. Exactly. And the Apple thing will pop up and be like, double click to confirm, and I'm like, ooh, thank you. I meant to click not that.
Exactly. But they don't have to do that on a subsequent purchases in an app. It's the most insidious thing I've ever heard. And such an easy fix. Just make you confirm every single time.
What do you think? So I feel like this is a problem with like, I will say probably like lower end app games. How do you think this bleeds into the wider industry of like people playing video games in a larger way?
I mean, it kind of ties into the whole games as a service mantra that the gaming industry is going through right now. Like I've noticed it most prevalently with the new Star Wars Battlefront games, where you buy a base game expecting there to be a certain level of quality there, but really what you're buying into is the ability to get in on the ground floor of a game that's going to continue being developed. So you're not really purchasing like a finalized product like we used to be able to purchase. You're buying essentially an early access game that's being marketed as being finalized, which is also extremely insidious.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Do you think that games like Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft kind of are the same kind of thing? Because those are kind of, I think, meant to be a forever developing game.
Yeah, and I think that's different because they're not marketing it as being like finalized.
Yes,
like,
yeah.
When you buy an MMO, you're aware that game, like the game that you get at release, is essentially complete as is, and you're getting an extra huge expansion every 1 or 2 years.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But for instance, using the example I already did, like Battlefront, only had like 2-3 maps at release.
I do remember this.
It's like it's barely classified as being complete. So yeah,
I agree. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. I think that's the increasing focus on the monetization and how they can make money is definitely bleeding into adding a disenjoyment of certain video games. There's lots of cases over the past year or two of the worst marketing decision you could ever make. And I can, my favorite examples are the new Diablo game. Awful. Yeah. Terrible.
The Immortal one. Yeah.
Yep. Just like, so basically what they've done with this is they've called it free, and it is free to play. You can play for free, you watch through ads, you do your things as a normal app game, but to be any good in the game, to compete in any form, or in some cases like beat bosses, finish things, you have to spend money. You have to buy in-game chests to get the loot that actually works for in-game things. And that is a lie. Like, they lied when they said it's free to play, because they've put barriers of payment in it. Yeah, and then there's two more. Battlefront, the new Call of Duty, and there's another new game that it's not coming to my head, but where they pair up with phone plans. You have to have a phone plan to play.
I didn't hear about this.
So the new Call of Duty that just came out, I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. Something to Overwatch 2. Boom. You have to have a phone plan to play it. It doesn't matter who it's with, but it can't, like, basically they've excluded the market of like cricket users or month-to-month basis contracts, because that isn't a phone plan. You have to have a phone plan with a phone company in order to play the game.
Bizarre.
Wild.
Absolutely bizarre. What? Like, I can't even begin to understand the justification for that like level of restriction.
It seems, and maybe things have changed. Once I heard that, I stopped. I don't care anymore about those games, and I won't play them because that feels so exclusionary. So I stopped paying attention. Maybe things have sort of changed, but I haven't heard anyone in any of the social spheres being like, it's good now, I can play it, and I couldn't before. So it doesn't feel like that's changed. Yeah, so it just feels the monetization is seeming to get a little bit more and more exclusionary.
And what game publishers used to do, and what I feel like we would all be better off if they got back to, is stop treating games as a service and more as products. Like, they essentially used to be artists making a painting for however long. And at the end of that time, if you did a good job, it would like, the business side can't be ignored. At the end of that process, you have to have something to sell in order for you to make it a living. So I get that they need to make money. But what they used to do is they used to treat it as a product, where at the end of the process, they'd sell it. And if it was really good, it'd make a lot of money. If it was really bad, it would tank. And they'd have like some leeway to be like artistic within those means. But what they're trying to do is trying to build up this like income stream of regular like microtransactions, DLC purchases, so that they can keep that income like flowing and be more like regular. They don't care if it's less, if it's more, they just want it consistent.
Yeah.
And I feel like they would be better served if they just treated as products again instead of as services.
I agree. That's not to say that there aren't good serviced games out there. Like when we talk about games like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy 14, like that's the way to do a service-based game.
Exactly.
Well and correctly.
RuneScape, wildly.
Huge.
I'm a huge fan of RuneScape. They do exactly the same thing. I mean, they also have like a bunch of like weird pop-ups where they encourage you to spend money, of course, like every game does nowadays. But they've done a great job of like maintaining a game as a service throughout the years.
Nintendo's getting a little worse at it, but I feel like I used to beg my TV, loudly shouting at it, crying, please give me more Mario Kart. I need another Mario Kart. And now they release they're like, no new Mario Kart, but what you get is 10 map packs, and we'll release them over the next year. You just have to purchase once. And that to me is worth it as a service now, because I have a ton of content. I've played it so much that I want more. Rather than making me buy a $60 game, I'll purchase a $25 map pack that doubles my game that I currently have. Exactly. So I'm okay with that.
Like the new God of War game is very similar, where we played through the first one and I was like, I just want to play this game more. You know, I just want to keep seeing where the story goes. I love the mechanics of it. It feels so fluid. And that's exactly what they did in Ragnarok. Is they improved on some aspects, but for the most part, it's exactly the same game. You're just going to different places this time,
continuing the story.
Exactly. And that is such a perfect example of a game that's done it right. I don't think they have any sort of DLC for them either. They've done like some collector's editions, but they haven't done any add-ons. They haven't included any microtransactions.
Rather than DLC, they make a game, another one that's good and continuous.
Exactly. And it's just like it's almost universally beloved by everyone who plays it at this point, because it feels like it's complete. It doesn't feel like they've suckered you in with a $30 purchase so that they can hit you with a $5 purchase ad infinitum.
I am appreciative when a DLC does like solidify the game that I have in place. Like there's a Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC, Isle of Armor. I personally haven't played through it, but I've seen the response to it and how it like improved Scarlet Violet, Sword and Shield. It did the things that you felt like you were missing from this original stage of it. So that's good. Like if you can improve it, it's already a good, well-made, fully completed game. Don't need more. Exactly. But now that there's this weird improvement, here you go. If you want it, take it. If you don't, that's okay, because it's already a complete game.
There's this great game, Graveyard Keeper. It's kind of like a gothic Stardew Valley. And they've also have had like a bunch of different expansion packs that add new mechanics, new ways to play the game into it. But the game was already like fairly fleshed out when it came out. You know, they're just adding a new aspect to it that improves on like both the story of the game, like the mechanics of it. That one doesn't feel like, those expansions don't feel cheap. It feels like they've earned them. You know, like I'll happily pay $10 for something to add on to a game I already love that feels really unique and creative. I don't want to pay an additional purchase for you to complete the game that you've already promised.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, just like I enjoy completed work, and that's what I used to purchase. And sometimes nowadays that it may not be the case, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
It is what it is.
I'm even okay with a slight increase in the price, as we've seen recently, to give me that game, because I know that now as an adult, I know the work that goes into doing this. I know how adults have time, only so much time, and if they're doing this 12 hours a day, then what are they doing outside of that? I'll pay $10 more a copy of a game, $20 more a copy to make sure that I feel comfortable with that. But gracious, I just they're putting out uncompleted games. I don't know.
And that's why, honestly, going back to the other point, that's why I've gravitated so much more towards board games recently. because board games, you pay whatever, like a premium for whatever the game is, but at least it's complete, and you get hours and hours of enjoyment out of it. But you can like my new Betrayal game, I know I'm gonna play like another 50 times or so, because it's already complete. There might be an expansion pack that makes it amazing in the future, but it's already done. I don't need to worry about that anymore.
I bought an incomplete board game.
Wait, what?
We were in a board game store. We were like, let's go look at a board game store. It's so cool. So fun. So we're digging around board games, like the good, big, complete, full, like Betrayal. It's like an expensive board game when you think about buying Monopoly. And so we're digging around, and we come across this game called Coma Ward, and reading the box and looking through it, it pitched to be similar to like a more horror version of Betrayal. And I was like, this is good. I like this. And it was on mega sale because it was opened. It was like opened in some other form or fashion. It wasn't like someone bought it, opened it, and returned it. It was just like maybe they got it and the package had been punctured or something. So mega sale, bought it, got it home. It is like Betrayal. It plays like Betrayal, but it feels to me like this is the beta version, and they had not maybe tested everything out, which is wild because in one playthrough I got we were like, okay, we'll have to do this card this way because it cannot happen like this. So after our playthrough, we tried again, and we were like, yeah, this is an incomplete board game, like an incomplete. Somehow they actually sent it out and got a box and finished it without it being done. It's in so much beta that it we haven't gone back to play it again because it just doesn't.
Sure.
Too many times do you have to say, we'll just do this way, that it makes it not complete. It's a wild thing to find in a board game shop.
Yeah, true.
But mostly you're right.
Yeah. That's funny. That I hadn't thought about that, like missing pieces or rules that are on beta tested. That's true. I typically only play or buy games I've seen played on like tabletop review channels on YouTube. Will Wheaton's old series Tabletop, was it just Tabletop? I think there was another word there, but I don't remember. Will Wheaton had a series where he played tabletop games with his like friends, and I loved that series because it introduced me to so many different games, helped me get a feel for them, and then ultimately, if I wanted to buy and play that game on my own. So a lot of my collection of games comes from his series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
There you go.
Well, I feel like we're approaching a good end point here. I don't want to push our time too much.
Sure.
But maybe as a sort of wrap up, is there anything about video games, board games, the gaming industry that we haven't talked about or that you normally think about that we haven't approached?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much talked on everything.
Yeah.
We talked about community. We talked about relaxation, talked about stimulation. Yeah, I think we covered everything.
That's fantastic. Then why don't you just as like an end note summarize for us what we've why this brings you joy?
Sure. So I love just playing games in general just because it helps me connect with people. It helps me have a really fun time with people and provides sort of like a structure for what that is without needing to be super freeform. Because it exposes me to a ton of great stories that I wouldn't have had the chance to experience otherwise.
Absolutely. That you just simply couldn't sometimes otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we are going to be wrapping up here, but I really appreciate you making the time to come on out and share, your connection to this topic with us, to video games, and like your past with it, where we're at, maybe some, feelings about the whole industry as a as a whole. So yeah, I appreciate you coming out and making some time to be on the podcast today.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. We are, like I said, we're gonna do some close up stuff, but I will reach out to you soon, and we'll chat then.
Perfect.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for watching.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody. We're back here now, and I appreciate everyone coming on out to join us today on the 17th episode with my guest, Dakota Heer. We talked a lot today about video games, about board games, about his connection with that. As always, I feel like there is a way to pull in our forever search for what is joy here on this podcast. There's insights we can glean here, right? I think I even use that phrase maybe quite a lot. And that is there's feelings like I think Dakota aptly put, relaxation, stimulation, feelings of, the community vibe, bringing a community of people together, allowing yourself to have a bouncing board, being open, pitching new things, playing new things, just relaxing together, giving us a moment to connect in our sometimes wild, sometimes totally locked down life that we face every day. I think that this gives us a moment to step out of that sphere, right? And a lot of joys do just give you a moment to focus elsewhere outside of the life that you're facing now. So that, as a whole, I think is a good thing to draw across a lot of these joys. The way that it draws our community together, the feelings, the nostalgic feelings that they generally tend to give us. Be that art, be that like playing old video games that we played as kids, or just specific art styles that draw us into that world, can just really bring joy, it seems. So, in closing, I'd like to thank Dakota for, like I said, to him making the time to come on out and be a part of this podcast, being so open and honest with his feelings on the topic, and just sharing his overall experience with us. I'd like to thank you folks for coming on out, listening, and watching along with us. I really appreciate it. I would like to thank MioWnize and Merda for allowing me to use their music on the podcast, in the intro, the transitions, the outro here. I really appreciate them. You can find them on Soundcloud, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your music. You can find MioWnize and Merda there, so go check them out. And I think that is our episode, folks. So thanks everyone for coming on out and joining us on the 17th episode of the PureJoy Podcast with my guest, Dakota Heer. Really appreciate you all for joining, and we'll see you next time.